All right, we're
Cool.
recording.
Yeah, so I'll just get started. So, some of the things that the Monitor product team are working on is, we already have this kind of, I guess you can call it, place to stand on Kubernetes, and we're continuing to adopt the Kubernetes and cloud native observability patterns. But the first one is really Prometheus. We have a deep integration with Prometheus, where you can install Prometheus in your Kubernetes cluster that's attached to your project or your group, and then allow your applications to send metrics to that Prometheus server, and then create alerts and then incidents from those. And that kind of the integration that we're doing there between Prometheus and Kubernetes is really aimed at making that more readily usable for application developers, so they don't have to deal with the toil of setting up their own Prometheus server, understanding how their labeling will impact the alerts that are created, understanding how to set up dashboarding and where to point those alerts so that they have to create webhooks for them. So really, I think our focus is primarily around that integration between Kubernetes and Prometheus in terms of creating a DevOps loop. And for us, that DevOps loop is you've got an application in production. It has some SLOs, some service level objectives in terms of like response rate, that when that objective is not met, it triggers an alert and creates an incident in GitLab for you and your team to respond to and remediate. And so there's a bunch of additional work we're doing with other CNCF projects that are around logging and tracing and error tracking that enable you to do the diagnostics once you have an incident, right? So like now I've got an incident and I'm responding to it. I want to look at the logs. I want to look at a recent trace. But those are the primary thing we're trying to focus on, is building that feedback loop to create an incident from Prometheus metrics, and then move on to the other CNCF projects. But a big part of what I think GitLab enables for customers in the operations space is like kind of easy CNCF or easy cloud native operations, because we've pre-integrated them. A lot of the pain point that operators have is when adopting cloud native or in Kubernetes is like, how do I connect all these services together? How do I make sure I have a robust operations, or we would use the term observability suite, when they're new, the technologies are kind of still evolving? How do I stay up with that? And GitLab kind of out of the box stays up with that, because we're constantly adopting the newest versions of those software. And our whole convention over configuration means we don't leave it to you to figure it out. We've figured it out for you as a default.
Okay, that sounds really cool. So do you have like a demo that kind of could illustrate like what some of these integrations would look like?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've just been working with our customer success and solution architects team about creating a demo that more directly highlights the monitoring capabilities. If you look at our standard, I think we call it idea to monitor demo today, it doesn't cover that full loop, actually. It covers, I think mostly when we say monitor in that demo, it covers monitoring the performance of a release as it's released. So that's like kind of more in the merge request, not now that it's in production and operating it. So no, I'm sure we have some videos of people configuring it. I think there's even a couple of the engineering team like explaining to other team members how you configure it, but not a great demo that I'm presently aware of for
Okay,
that whole
no
end-to-end.
worries.
Yeah, I would love to create one, and now is as good a time as any to force that issue and create one. So
Great. So then what are some of the other cool things that you're working on with monitoring besides like closing this loop?
yeah, so if you look at our categories in the monitor stage, we're certainly advancing what we call the APM group, which is metrics, logging, and tracing. And we have MVCs for logging and tracing, and are really focused on improving our capabilities and metrics at the moment. And then we have the other group, which is called health, and that's about cluster monitoring. So there's like default
Okay.
monitoring that happens on the Kubernetes cluster. We pre-configure to say, you know, like capacity metrics or CPU metrics on your Kubernetes cluster you would want to know and be alerted on if those are out of bound, if you're using, you know, 95% of your available CPU. And so cluster monitoring is a big focus. We'd like to start adding capabilities for cluster cost optimization. So informing users not just when they're hitting capacity, but when they're significantly under capacity and should probably size down. That helps users who've configured a Kubernetes cluster not end up wasting it because it's being underutilized, or not end up wasting money. We also have work for, there's another subset of the monitor group that is kind of a global optimization for us, because while we primarily develop features for users and our customers to monitor their applications in production and respond to their applications incidents in production, we are starting to build, I guess, we've taken on this task or category of also providing the monitoring for the GitLab instance itself. So if you're the administrator of a GitLab instance that you've deployed on AWS or in your local in your own data center, we have some capabilities that we call the admin dashboard, the monitoring section of the admin dashboard, that allow you to understand the health of that instance. And the monitor group has been working to improve those capabilities, especially as our larger customers would like more information and instrumentation about how GitLab as a software application is performing, largely because they're relying on it more, right? We're taking on more of the DevOps lifecycle, so the importance of GitLab remaining up and responsive is continuing to increase. But the monitor stage has kind of adopted that set of functionality, because what we'd like to do is extract it from a kind of specific admin view for your GitLab instance to actually show all the same capabilities we show for GitLab self-managed instance administration as part of a project using the same GitLab monitor features. And I understand that feels convoluted, but essentially, like, today you can create a project for your application that's a e-commerce app and plumb it and get the instrumentation to know whether the Kubernetes cluster is experiencing pain, whether SLOs that you custom define have alerts and respond to that with incidents. We'd like you to have that exact same experience, or expose you to that same experience potentially with your GitLab self-managed instance, so that as an administrator, you're using the same tools that your developers would use for their applications to monitor and respond to the GitLab instance as they would. So it gives more exposure to the features that we provide to customers' applications by, like, kind of putting it in front of their administrators and being like, hey, you should use these same features for monitoring your GitLab instance, while also hopefully providing, it's kind of like a dog fooding for the features that we are providing to make sure they're kind of battle tested on a large application. Does that make sense? That is a concept that's always hard to communicate well, but I try to differentiate between self-monitoring and application monitoring. And basically, we want to self-monitor with the same tools we use for application monitor. And frankly, the term monitor ends up being super confusing, because inside a company, monitor can mean how you're monitoring your actual application. For us, that's GitLab.com, or your production application, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the tools we provide to our customers to monitor the applications that they deploy in production, in this case, typically on a Kubernetes cluster.
Okay, so then what you're saying is that you're creating new tools to help, to help our customers better monitor, like, the health of their GitLab instance, like our self-managed customers. Is that correct?
Yes, and the critical point is that, sorry, we're doing that with using the same tools that we give them to monitor their non-GitLab applications, right? Like, so typically they have this GitLab instance. It is housing the repositories for and running CI and configuring the Kubernetes cluster and deploying to production for their apps, if they're an e-commerce company, for their e-commerce website, let's say. And they're going to use the same tools they would use to monitor their e-commerce app as their GitLab instance. and that has the benefit of our monitoring tools aren't super well adopted today, but we'd love them to be. And so by exposing them, so every GitLab instance has one project that's using the monitoring tools, it just happens to be monitoring GitLab itself, means that there's a lot more exposure for us to administrators and to users about what kind of capabilities we have.
I think I'm following. I may have to like digest this a little bit more and then follow up with you later. So,
oh man, I was gonna say I would show you this. Actually, let me show you this.
Yeah, that would be great. It would be great to see some visuals to sort of like.
Oh, it's not gonna be visuals. Like
Okay.
It's just gonna be a wall of text, but
That's fine.
this is the monitor vision page.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yes, I was about to pull that up.
It goes through dog fooding. This kind of describes what we're doing. But then there are categories, and these first categories are about like application performance monitoring for customers. And then there's this one called GitLab self-monitoring. And the vision for that kind of provides some explanation of what we're doing and why it's important to have observability for your GitLab instance. So.
Okay, so you're focusing a little bit less on the APM group. Like those are the tools that we're at sort of the like minimum viable change stage, but the monitoring team is working a little bit more on the cluster monitoring, the self-monitoring side of things.
Our primary focus are on metrics and metrics, incident management, and cluster monitoring. Metrics and cluster monitoring are kind of similar because, well, for various reasons. And that again is about a prioritization of this feedback loop, right? I want to make sure that we can first provide to our customers the instrumentation so that when their application, that they can define an SLO, that when their application exceeds or fails to achieve that SLO, that they can respond in an incident. And then once we have them doing that, we'll get a lot of good feedback and immediate feedback from users about what tools they need for diagnostic purposes. And the other tools, specifically logging and error tracking and tracing, are really what you would use for diagnostic purposes, less for instrumenting when I want an incident to happen. It's not uncommon for people, for users to create alerts based on logs, to be like, if I get this kind of log pattern, I want to create an alert. But as a primary, they create alerts based on metrics. So I want that loop working first. Then we get a lot of feedback in the diagnostics about what kind of logging they need, what kind of tracing they would want available to them. By focusing on those first, we're kind of creating an experience that people won't typically use because they're not going through the incident response flow with us.
Okay, cool. So then, what would you say are some of the challenges that you've encountered with sort of developing this better feedback loop, like as monitoring sort of dives into these new initiatives?
Yeah, I'll say one of the, not challenges, but one of the really smart decisions that we made as a company was our early investment in Kubernetes. So we have a lot of people who are very well informed about Kubernetes and how to configure it. I think it was years ago that we first started installing a Prometheus server. So we have a lot of experience with Prometheus. We dog food Prometheus. So that interconnection between Kubernetes and Prometheus, I wouldn't really say is a challenge. It's a significant opportunity for us to continue to leverage. And like I said, I do think our customers are the beneficiaries of our early expertise, because we're kind of then saying these are the best practices and these are the ways for you to configure these two technologies to work together in a kind of best practice sort of way. So we get the benefit of that, and that has meant that our ability to add kind of out of the box capabilities to have Prometheus and Kubernetes connected and then drive those into instance has been very successful. I think we'll hit challenges when we get to customers who want to operate things that aren't on Kubernetes infrastructure. We're gonna face challenges for how do we support those types of workflows. Some of that is just people are on a Kubernetes migration journey today. Companies are, developers are, and so having any production application today, a lot of production applications, not most, a lot of production applications today are not Kubernetes based, but they might still want to use GitLab. They're holding their source code and maybe doing their CI in GitLab. They're not using the configure stage of let's deploy to a Kubernetes cluster, but they do want to have that feedback loop of I still have instrumentation, I still have metrics that are submitted, and I still want to have incidents respond to those metrics. So we'll need to, that will be a challenge as we figure out how to complete that loop without Kubernetes in the middle, right? Where maybe that's the challenge is we've relied on Kubernetes, and we do that as a principle. We've said cloud native first is a principle of our product, but I think that will be a challenge. It's an evolving technology landscape. It is a consolidating technology landscape. There's a lot of operations tools that people have grown accustomed to that are what you would consider legacy tools that are not necessarily made for the modern era. So switching costs can be painful for users who might be coming from something that was almost of a different paradigm than what we would propose them to be on. So that was actually less about technology evolving and more about markets consolidating. The technology evolving, like even in the cloud native space, there are competing projects that might kind of provide the same functionality that we have to choose which one we should use by default, and those choices can end up being difficult. Typically, we don't make them one-way door decisions, but they can be challenges to think through which choice. So for instance, I think there are 2 or 3 different logging services in the CNCF market today. There are observability experts who claim that like either all you need is metrics, or you need metrics, tracing, and logging for a complete observability system, or maybe all you need is logging. There's kind of a varied opinion about, in the new world that's Kubernetes based, what does an observability system look like? There's a legacy view of it, but that seems to be evolving. So keeping up with that kind of the industry's evolution of what we consider required. We as a company just need to stay focused on what our users are asking for, and that's why I think completing that loop is important first, because then we'll start getting immediate user feedback. But yeah, keeping up with those trends is probably another challenge.
Okay, great. So is there anything else like that the monitoring team is working on that you think would be really important to highlight, either inside or outside of the loop that you're working on?
Yeah, the GitLab self-monitor one is a big one that is outside of the loop, right? And for us, that is really about enabling exposure and also the ongoing recognition that as a single DevOps platform, and as more and more people are using us for that purpose, or a single DevOps tool, we are a very critical part of any company's infrastructure. Like saying GitLab is down means potentially thousands of developers are down and not able to do their work. So I think our ongoing recognition of that fact and our investment in making sure that we provide not only a kind of robust architecture and an application that is resilient and performant, but also that we are giving you tools to respond when it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing is important. So, but otherwise, I think it's really about the loop of cluster monitoring, metrics feeding into incident management and incident response.
Great. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I'm going to send this out to get transcribed, digest it a little bit, and then follow up with you with more questions.
Awesome.
When I do have a draft ready, it would be really great if you'd be willing to review it just to make sure that I have the technical details right. I'm a little bit new to the DevOps space, so I'm still learning. So I really would appreciate your input as a technical expert and the monitoring SEM. So
cool. Yeah, that's great. And I will say I love this process of us just having a conversation, it being recorded, and like hopefully that generating content. I'm happy to do that anytime.
great.
Can I request, like, if it's easier, if you could just send me the file? I'd love to post it on GitLab Unfiltered and share it with some other team members, if that's all right.
Sure. Yeah, no problem at all. All about transparency, right?
Exactly.
All right, awesome. Thank you again for taking the time.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Bye.
Bye.